What if your neighbor, coworker, or classmate suddenly vanished, sent back to a country they haven't seen in decades? In 2025, under Donald Trump's second term, deportations in the US are skyrocketing, and some nationalities are feeling the heat more than others. Which countries are topping the list? Why are thousands being forced to leave, even after building lives here? And how are border arrests, visa crackdowns, and controversial policies reshaping immigrant communities? Get ready to uncover top 10 countries facing deportation in the USA under Donald Trump. Number 10. Afghanistan. Afghanistan. You might be surprised, but yes, Afghan nationals are currently being deported from the US in growing numbers. Since the Taliban's return to power in 2021, the situation back home has been rocky, to say the least. That's why many Afghans fled and sought asylum here. But under the Trump 2025 deportation wave, the US has decided to resume removals, especially for those whose asylum claims were denied or who entered illegally after the evacuation period ended. Here's the kicker. Due to the diplomatic freeze between Washington and the Taliban-led government, the US can't directly deport many people to Afghanistan. So what's the workaround? Third country deportations. According to AP News, over 500 Afghans have been sent to countries like Panama and Costa Rica since January 2025 under special repatriation agreements. These nations, in exchange for financial support and diplomatic perks, are temporarily hosting deported individuals from Asia until final arrangements can be made. As of early 2025, around 14,000 Afghan nationals were estimated to be in removal proceedings, with nearly 3,000 already processed for deportation. Many had entered the U.S. post-2021 evacuation without proper documentation, hoping to reunite with family or escape danger. But under Trump's renewed enforcement using the Alien Enemies Act, the administration is targeting individuals it deems potential security threats, which includes those without strong legal claims. Still, many Afghans are protesting their removals, stating they face danger if returned home. Social media is buzzing with stories of families split apart, students being detained, and even interpreters who helped U.S. forces now facing deportation. It's emotional, it's complicated, and it's definitely a story that deserves to be told with care. What makes this truly unique is that we're seeing geopolitics collide with immigration policy in real time. The situation is like a high-stakes game of chess. And sadly, thousands of real people are caught in the middle. Number 9. Pakistan. Pakistan, and let me tell you, this one doesn't make headlines as loudly as some others, but it's quietly becoming a major part of the deportation landscape in 2025. Under President Trump's renewed push for mass deportations, Pakistani nationals are increasingly finding themselves in removal proceedings. And while it may not sound dramatic, the numbers are rising fast. In 2024 alone, the U.S. deported over 2,500 Pakistani citizens, and by the end of March 2025, we're already seeing a 35% increase compared to the same period last year. Many of those facing deportation are individuals who overstayed their visas, especially student and business visas. In fact, a report from ICE noted that around 61% of deported Pakistanis in the last 12 months had initially entered the U.S. legally but failed to maintain legal status. That's where the real pressure is coming in now. Trump's administration is cracking down hard on visa overstays, and South Asians, particularly from Pakistan and India, are getting caught in that net. What's also unique about the Pakistani deportation cases is that many of them involve lengthy legal battles. Roughly 1 in every 3 Pakistani immigrants facing deportation has filed appeals or is seeking asylum based on religious or political persecution back home. Unfortunately, approval rates remain low, hovering at just 18% for Pakistani asylum cases in 2025. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Deportation flights to Pakistan are often coordinated under intense diplomatic negotiations. Sometimes people wait months in ICE detention because of delays with paperwork or travel documents. And unlike with some Central American countries, the US doesn't have the same fast-track repatriation deals with Pakistan. That's why third country removals are being considered here too, with Costa Rica and even Serbia stepping in as temporary relocation zones. There's a human angle too. Social media is flooded with stories from Pakistani families who've lived in the US for years, even decades, building businesses, raising kids, suddenly being told it's time to go. One case in New Jersey even involved a family of 4 who owned a gas station for 12 years, but were deported due to a paperwork issue. This story is not just about numbers, it's about real people, often caught between shifting laws and unforgiving bureaucracy. Number 8. India. India. And this one's a real twist because when people think of Indian immigration to the US, they often think of Silicon Valley, H-1B visas, and thriving communities. But here's the thing. India has quietly become one of the fastest-growing groups facing deportation in 2025. Yep, that's right. While India has long been a top source of legal immigration, especially in high-skilled sectors, there's also been a sharp rise in undocumented entries and visa overstays that are now catching up under Trump's strict enforcement policies. In 2023, ICE deported just under 1,200 Indian nationals. But fast forward to March 2025, and that figure is already sitting at over 2,800. That's more than double in less than 2 years. Why the spike? Well, a lot of it has to do with Indians arriving at the US-Mexico border, often after long and dangerous journeys through South and Central America. In 2024 alone, over 41,000 Indians were apprehended at the southern border, an all-time record. These are often individuals fleeing persecution, economic hardship, or simply chasing the American dream. Many come from Punjab and Gujarat, and a large percentage of them claim asylum once they arrive. But under Trump's new Remain in Mexico 2.0 policy, most of these claims are denied or severely delayed, leading to detention and eventual deportation. Asylum approval rates for Indians in 2025 are hovering around just 15%, down from 24% 2 years ago. And here's a surprising angle. Many of these deportees are young, between 18 to 35 years old, and tech-savvy. Some were students who overstayed their F-1 visas. Others were caught in the gray areas of job transfers, while others simply tried their luck crossing the Darien Gap. Social media platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram are full of guides on how to reach the US through Nicaragua, Panama, and Mexico. But now, many of these hopefuls are finding themselves on ICE's radar. What makes the India story unique is that it's not just about border crossings or visa overstays. It's about a shift in how desperate young people are willing to risk everything, and how even those with once stable pathways to citizenship are getting caught in the deportation dragnet. Number 7. China. China. And this one's got a whole different flavor. It's not just about immigration anymore. It's geopolitical, it's tense, and it's getting real complicated. In 2025, the US-China relationship is frosty at best, and that chill is now being felt by thousands of Chinese immigrants who are suddenly in the deportation spotlight. Under Trump's national security agenda, Chinese nationals are being scrutinized like never before. According to DHS data, about 1,900 Chinese nationals were deported in 2023. But that number spiked to over 4,100 in 2024. And as of March 2025, we're already looking at 2,200 removals this year alone. And it's not just about illegal border crossings, though that's part of it. It's also about student visa crackdowns, expired business visas, and in some cases, suspicions of espionage. Yikes! You've probably heard of the China Initiative that started years ago under Trump's first term. It's back in a new form. In 2025, individuals from China, especially in tech and research fields, are being watched more closely than ever. Students on F-1 and J-1 visas are facing increased surveillance, and some are being deported for minor visa violations. In fact, nearly 1 in 4 Chinese deportees in 2025 are students or researchers. And don't forget the southern border again. Over 24,000 Chinese nationals were apprehended at the US-Mexico border in 2024, a record high. Most were fleeing political persecution or looking for better economic opportunities. While some did get asylum, the majority are now stuck in limbo, held in detention centers, or being deported to China, or in some cases to countries like Panama and Costa Rica, thanks to those third-country transit deals. What makes China's story so fascinating is that it's not just immigration. It's deeply tied to U.S. national security, tech rivalry, and global politics. Even people with minor infractions are being labeled as potential threats, and it's creating fear in the Chinese-American community. You'll hear stories of PhD students being pulled off planes, families separated after decades, and business owners detained for tiny clerical errors. This isn't just about people breaking the rules. It's about a system shifting beneath their feet. And that shift is catching thousands off guard. Number 6. Haiti. Imagine being from a country facing one crisis after another: political instability, gang violence, economic collapse, and natural disasters. Now, imagine being sent back there under Trump's renewed deportation push in 2025. That's the harsh reality for thousands of Haitians right now. As of March 2025, over 6,700 Haitian nationals have been deported or are in deportation proceedings, a 40% increase compared to the same period last year. Many of these individuals were apprehended at the southern U.S. border, and others had temporary protected status, TPS, that either expired or was revoked under the Trump administration. TPS once protected over 60,000 Haitians in the U.S., but in early 2025, new rules rolled back that protection unless individuals had active renewals. What's even tougher? Many Haitians in the U.S. have been living here for years, decades even. Some arrived after the 2010 earthquake, rebuilt their lives, started families, and opened businesses. Now, they're being told to return to a country where 80% of the capital, Port-au-Prince, is under gang control, and nearly 5 million people face acute food insecurity. It's devastating. Deportation flights to Haiti have resumed in full force, with ICE organizing multiple removals per week. One recent report showed 127 deportees on a single flight, many arriving with nothing but the clothes on their backs. There are emotional reunions, but also fear, confusion, and in some cases, immediate danger. In fact, human rights groups say some deportees have been kidnapped or extorted within hours of landing in Haiti. And yet, there's another side to this: incredible community strength. Haitian advocacy groups across the U.S. are stepping up from Miami to Boston, rallying to support affected families, fund legal aid, and challenge these deportations in court. Still, many fear that unless policies shift, deportations to Haiti will continue, despite the humanitarian nightmare waiting on the other side. This is one of those situations where policy meets real pain. It's not just stats, it's people, families, lives. And your viewers will definitely feel the emotional weight of this one. Number 5. Venezuela. Venezuela, and folks, this one is dramatic on every level. With the country's ongoing economic collapse, authoritarian politics, and mass migration, Venezuelans have been on the move for years now. But in 2025, under Trump's immigration agenda, the U.S. is stepping up deportations of Venezuelan nationals, especially those suspected of gang activity or crossing the border without documentation. More than 7.7 million Venezuelans have fled their country over the past decade, making this one of the largest refugee crises in the world. In 2024 alone, the U.S. apprehended over 58,000 Venezuelans at the southern border, a record. Fast forward to 2025, and deportation flights are now regular, especially after a new bilateral deal between the U.S. and Venezuela's de facto government. So far this year, over 3,900 Venezuelans have been deported, and that number is growing fast. A big part of this is tied to a rising concern about Tren de Aragua, Venezuela's most feared transnational gang. The Trump administration claims that deportations are targeting criminal elements, but human rights groups argue that many innocent people are being lumped in without evidence. And here's where it gets really complicated. Venezuela is still facing 95% inflation, food and medicine shortages, and political suppression. Deportees are being dropped into chaos. Some are even being returned to third countries like Colombia or the Dominican Republic if U.S. officials believe they have dual residency or connections there. On social media, Venezuelan migrants are sharing emotional videos of families separated by deportations. You'll see moms with kids born in the U.S., workers with asylum pending, and students caught up in raids. It's intense. And to top it off, many deportees say they were misled or denied due process, a claim that's being investigated by immigration watchdog groups. So why is Venezuela at number 5? Because it's not just about breaking immigration laws. It's about survival, misidentification, and being caught in a political storm. For many Venezuelans, being deported right now is like being sent from hope back into hopelessness. Number 4. Honduras. Honduras. And this one's a story that repeats again and again across the US-Mexico border. Hondurans have long been part of the migrant caravans we've all seen in the news, walking miles in the scorching heat, fleeing crime and poverty, all for a chance at safety and opportunity in the United States. But in 2025, under Trump's second term, those dreams are being cut short, and fast. According to CBP reports, more than 190,000 Hondurans attempted to cross the southern border in 2024 alone. That's a huge number, second only to Mexico. And now in 2025, deportation numbers are soaring. So far this year, ICE has deported over 11,000 Hondurans, with weekly charter flights to San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa. A lot of the deportees are families, moms with kids, single fathers, even teens who came unaccompanied. Many of them claim asylum, citing rampant gang violence and lack of economic opportunities in Honduras. But the approval rate? It's pretty dismal. Only about 12% of Hondurans applying for asylum in the US in 2025 have been successful. The rest are either denied or waiting indefinitely in detention. Here's the thing. Honduras is one of the most dangerous countries in the Western Hemisphere. Gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 control entire neighborhoods, and extortion is a daily threat. Despite this, Trump's policy emphasizes rapid removals, often skipping lengthy court reviews under expedited removal programs. And it's happening fast, with some migrants being deported within 20 days of arrival. Meanwhile, back in the US, many Hondurans are trying to fight deportation from detention centers in Texas, Arizona, and Louisiana. But with overloaded immigration courts and minimal legal aid, it's like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. And don't forget the financial toll. Deported families often lose thousands of dollars spent on smugglers, travel, and fees. One study said the average Honduran migrant spends $7,000 to $10,000 just to reach the US, only to be sent back empty-handed. It's a heartbreaking cycle, but also a wake-up call for how complex and fragile the system is. For many Hondurans, the American dream is turning into a fast-track nightmare. Number 3. El Salvador. El Salvador, a nation known for its resilience, pupusas, and football passion, but also, sadly, for decades of violence and migration. In 2025, El Salvador finds itself once again at the heart of America's deportation surge. Under Trump's latest immigration directive, Salvadorans are being deported at an aggressive pace, even as conditions back home remain tough for returnees. As of March 2025, more than 13,000 Salvadorans have been deported from the US, a whopping 45% increase compared to this time last year. The majority were apprehended at the southern border, but a significant number were longtime residents with expired visas or denied asylum claims. El Salvador has long been among the top 5 countries of origin for undocumented immigrants in the US, with an estimated 750,000 Salvadorans living in America, many of whom are now under threat of removal. The situation gets more complex when you factor in temporary protected status, TPS. Over 200,000 Salvadorans had TPS following earthquakes in 2001, but in 2025, Trump has pushed to terminate those protections, triggering mass deportation fears. Many of these people have US-born children, homes, and businesses. Some have lived here for 20-plus years. Even with President Nayib Bukele's tough-on-crime reforms in El Salvador, which have reduced homicide rates by over 50% since 2021, returnees face challenges. There's still economic instability, unemployment hovering around 7%, and concerns about civil liberties in the new police-heavy environment. One of the most heartbreaking stories came out of Houston, where a Salvadoran single mother of 3 U.S. citizen children was deported after 19 years. No criminal record, no recent violations, just caught in the system. So, why is El Salvador number 3? Because the scale is huge, the stories are personal, and the policy changes are life-altering. Many of these deportees are being ripped away from communities they've called home for decades, and your viewers will feel that pain and injustice through every detail. Number 2. Guatemala. Guatemala, a small Central American country with big migration numbers. Guatemalans have consistently been among the top groups crossing the US-Mexico border, often as families or unaccompanied minors. But in 2025, Trump's ramped-up deportation strategy is targeting them more than ever before. In 2024, the US deported about 36,000 Guatemalans. But get this, just in the first quarter of 2025, over 11,500 Guatemalans have already been removed. That's nearly 130 people per day being sent back, many after weeks or months in detention. And this isn't just happening at the border. Deportation raids in US cities like Los Angeles, Houston, and Atlanta are scooping up long-term residents too. Guatemala has over 1.4 million of its citizens living in the US, most of them undocumented. Many come from indigenous communities and speak native languages like Quiche or Mam, making legal proceedings even more difficult. There's a huge language barrier in court, and only 1 in every 10 gets a proper interpreter, leading to misunderstandings and unfair decisions. Back home, the challenges are real. Nearly 60% of Guatemalans live below the poverty line, and many regions are plagued by drug violence and organized crime. Add to that climate change-driven droughts and crop failures, and you've got a recipe for desperation. So when deportees return, they often face homelessness, unemployment, and stigmatization. Some even reattempt the dangerous journey north, again and again. A recent viral story involved a 16-year-old boy who had walked over 2,000 miles to reach the US, only to be deported within 15 days. No lawyer, no hearing, no family. It sparked outrage online, with hashtags like #NoMoreChains trending for days. What makes Guatemala stand out isn't just the high deportation numbers. It's the sheer human cost. These aren't criminals or threats. They're kids, farmers, mothers, many just seeking safety and a shot at a better life. Your viewers will see the faces behind the stats and realize how deep and personal this crisis really is. Number 1. Mexico. Mexico. With a shared border and deep historical ties, Mexico has always been central to US immigration policy. But in 2025, under Trump's aggressive deportation agenda, Mexican nationals are once again topping the list of those being sent back, by the tens of thousands. As of mid-March 2025, the US has already deported over 41,000 Mexican nationals this year alone, averaging more than 500 people per day. That includes border crossers, visa overstayers, and people caught in nationwide ICE raids. In fact, Mexicans still make up over 60% of all deportations from the US, a staggering figure that shows just how massive this pipeline remains. And it's not just recent arrivals. Many of those being deported have lived in the US for years. A study in Texas found that nearly 1 in 3 deported Mexicans had been in the country for over a decade. Some owned businesses, others had mortgages, green card applications in process, or kids in college. Then there's the border itself. In 2024, more than 720,000 Mexican migrants were apprehended by Border Patrol. That number jumped 18% in early 2025 after the reinstatement of catch and deport rules, where people are removed within days of being caught, no hearing required. But here's the flip side. The US and Mexico rely on each other. Deportation flights are now landing in border cities like Tijuana, Ciudad Juarez, and Reynosa every day. Those cities are overwhelmed, with shelters packed and resources stretched. Mexican officials say over 125,000 deportees have been processed this year so far, and it's putting massive pressure on local services. Yet the human stories are what hit hardest. One viral video showed a man being deported after 17 years in Chicago. His US-born daughter crying, clutching her father's hand as ICE officers led him away. No criminal record, no warning, just gone. Mexico isn't just number 1 in deportations. It's ground zero for how complex, emotional, and controversial immigration enforcement can be. And your audience will definitely feel the weight of that reality in every heartbreaking, headline-making detail.